Hello science fans, welcome to SHE-ensya. Our topic for today is writing a research proposal. Part 1. Whether you're a student or a professional, writing a proposal is an essential skill needed in order to pursue research. So for today, we'll be having a lecture on how to start writing a proposal, specifically how to build your review of related literature. When people think about doing research, most of them fixate on the methodology or the results. Very few actually remember that the scientific method starts by asking a question and building your background about that question so that you can formulate a sound hypothesis. The RRL, or the Review of Related Literature, is a portion of the scientific method that allows you to create a robust background on a particular topic, so that even before you dedicate resources on doing the research, you actually have enough knowledge to create a sound hypothesis that would focus your research. So, although RRLs can be tedious to do and to make, it's actually an essential portion of your research. Before we dive into how to make an RRL, let's talk about what a related work is. A related work is typically a scientific publication that describes work that is similar or related to what you want to do. It can also talk about a domain or a field of discipline that is similar to yours, that is doing a similar process that you want to do. Finally, it could be a set of papers that contain methods that could be useful for your own research. All of these things need to be compiled so that you can show that you know what you're supposed to be doing and that what you're supposed to do is still relevant to the world right now. So for example, you're a student and your advisor told you that you wanted to work on crabs. When she wanted you to do molecular methods, particularly DNA barcoding and GIS, so that you can figure out where the crabs are in the Philippines and so that you can confirm the species identity of the crabs that you were able to catch. What do you do to start your RRL? A common mistake of students is to do research on everything about the subject without really considering the needs of their actual research. So if you look at the outline I present here, students would start talking about everything about crabs, which includes its biology, its ecology, its economic importance that may or may not necessarily be relevant to the location where you're in, and other aspects such as disease or maybe sex identification that has nothing to do with the research that you're doing. Some students would also start talking about the methods such as DNA extraction and then go straight to the details without really checking if it's relevant to the organism that they want to study. Some of them would even talk about the process without even considering if this process is applicable to the organism that they're studying or not. So, when you're trying to do the outline for your RRL, you have to be aware of the questions that you're trying to ask. It's easy to get lost when you're doing your own research. And even when you're just starting out, it can be pretty hard to figure out which information is useful for you or not. So to avoid getting lost, the first thing that you may want to do is to create a conceptual framework. Conceptual framework maps out the actions that you need to do in order to be able to explain the phenomenon that you are studying. So for example, if you're tackling species identification, the conceptual framework would prevent you from being distracted by other factors that are present in that organism that may not be related to species identification. Here is an example of a conceptual framework that I used for my dissertation. In my study, I dealt with the molecular and morphological characterization of sila in the Philippines. One of the key aspects that I focused on was actually the improvement of species identification for both adults and juveniles. The conceptual framework helped me focus all the information that I needed so that I only dealt with that and not other factors that may be relevant for the organism that I'm studying. For our lecture today, I will be using this conceptual framework and premise in order to give you examples on what to do and what not to do when you're making your RR. So before you actually go into Google Scholar or whatever database is most comfortable for you, one of the first things you may want to do after you've created your conceptual framework is to create your RRL outline. You can start by identifying keywords that are most essential for your research, and then draft questions that are related to those keywords that you may want to answer. This would help you figure out or limit the kinds of references that you would be looking for so that you can direct your audience towards the topic that you are actually focusing on. So for our example, if you want to deal with species identification in crabs, you have to put in the correct keywords. Sometimes you can put in too few, and other times you can put in too many. In this case, two keywords are identified, which includes mangrove crabs, which is the specific group of crabs that I wanted to study, and the word species identification. The essential aspects on the biology, habitat, and other questions about the crabs would fall under the subclassification of mangrove crabs, whereas the different methods for species identification can fall into the keyword that is species identification. The order by which they would come in your outline is now dictated by the conceptual framework. As you can see, since the mangrove crab is the main focus of the study, it comes first. And species identification comes in second because that is what I want to do to the mangrove crab. When it comes to filling up questions for each keyword, you have to ask yourself which questions are relevant to the problem I'm dealing with. So for example, in the keyword mangrove crab, I need to ask the question about the morphology of the crab. Does it change over time or is it the same? This might mean that I want to look at the specific life cycle that the crab has so that I could have answers to my questions. Another question is, why should I study crabs in the first place? Why is it important? Does it have important functions in the ecosystem it dwells on? Is it an important economic commodity? So, doing research on the importance of mangrove crabs gives gravity and value to the research that I'm doing. So, it will help me showcase to my readers the significance of the study. Now, when it comes to species identification, I think the most important question that I need to ask here is there a problem on species identification? Because sometimes we want to do a study, but it turns out there is no problem in the first place, so why do that study anyway? So building your RRL affirms to you that your study is actually worth doing. So now it's a two-factor reaffirmation. One, on whether or not mangrove crabs are important to study, and second, if the problem I've identified is actually a real problem. Once I've established that, I can then move on to looking at the different methods of species identification, both morphological and molecular. Once you have your outline, the next important thing for you to do is to build your own database. To keep track of your database, because this can be very overwhelming, is to create a table using Excel or another spreadsheet application so that you can keep track of the title of the article, the link to which you can go to so that you can read the article in further detail, the year it was published, and to which keyword and question it is attributed to. Now, some important details here would be the year of publication. When you do a quick search in the internet, sometimes it will give you very old articles from the 1980s, from the 1940s. And though some of them are still important today, you may want to keep to research that was done within the past 5 years. And this ensures that the literature that you're looking at is still relevant in such that it has already corrected the mistakes of the past, and it contains methods that are considered to be valid until today. Now please take note, what I'm talking about here are scientific publications. As much as possible, please stay away from your typical internet sources such as websites that are not .edu or .gov, Facebook sites, and other social media sites, as well as those that are blogs or non-validated references. Although these sources tend to make the science a little bit easier to understand, Some of them are non-refereed, meaning no other individual may be checking the information in these papers, and thus they could not be 100% factual. So as much as possible, use scientific publications in your references so that you are guaranteed that the science you're looking at is correct, relevant, and valid. One way for you to not be overwhelmed is to create a summary of the contents of each reference that you have in your database. So you can write 3 to 5 sentences on the general content, on the methods, on the purpose of this paper, based on which question in your outline it seeks to answer. Now, although it is best to read through the entire paper before including it in the RRL, if you have limitations in time, you might want to focus on why you included that paper into your RRL in the first place. Is it in order to help define the importance of your study? And if that's the case, you might want to read through the introduction as well as the results and discussion and conclusion of the paper, but not so much on the methods. On the other hand, if you're going to use that paper as a basis for the actual experimental steps that you're going to do, the methods and results are the most important parts of the paper. So try to filter through this information and create your own summary pages so that when you need the information immediately, you can just go through this summary document and it will be easier to find the information that you need. Once you have a summary of all the papers that you have, you can now go back to the outline that you made. So what you want to do now is to sift through the information in your database and use them to answer the questions in your outline. Subdivide your RRL into subchapters in such that one could be focusing on the organism that you're studying, next portion could be on the methods, and so on and so forth. Make sure that the paragraphs within each subchapter connect with each other, and they're not just a collection of paragraphs containing information that are unrelated. Another important aspect of your RRL is to include an introductory paragraph at the start that introduces the topic of your research, and then at the end, create a conclusion paragraph that highlights the gaps in knowledge about that topic that you are trying to fill. If you read through the introductory paragraph, the first portion, highlighted in blue, says that there is an expansive body of research on the genus Scylla from its biology and taxonomy to breeding technology and known diseases. This acknowledges that there are research that already exists, but then again, if in your case it's not the same, then say that it does not. It helps assure your readers that you've actually gone through the literature and you are able to summarize very, very quickly and concisely what you've noticed. The second portion of the introductory paragraph in red states that the aim of this study is to focus on the improvement of the species identification of the genus due to limitations these impose on efficient aquaculture of the organism. This portion indicates what I want to study, why I want to study it, and up to what point I want to study it. In other words, it's a version of the scope and limitations of the study. And it helps orient your reader, your panelists, or maybe your advisor of your understanding of what you actually want to do. Now, the last portion of this introductory paragraph states that literature on the life cycle and development, taxonomy, and morphological and molecular methods of species identification serves as basis for the characterization of mangrove crab samples. This gives an overview of the different topics discussed in my RRL, and it explains why these topics are relevant to my study. So as you can see, an introductory paragraph does not need to be very long, but it needs to contain all the information needed to orient your reader as to what you're trying to say. So, when you're starting to write your RRL, always go back to your conceptual framework and to the outline that you've created that's based on that conceptual framework. In my case, the first question that I wanted to answer is that why I should study mangrove crabs. So here, I present that mangrove crabs or mud crabs are actually high demand resources, which means they are valuable in an economic perspective. I back this up with information regarding total yield that the Philippines has and how much the organism is priced in the local and international markets. I also set up the premise in such that I also indicate how the Philippines plays in the international playing field, and this emphasizes that research on mangrove crabs is not just important in the Philippines, but also at a regional and even global scale. Now, since species identification and taxonomy is largely based on the appearance of the organism, the second question that I wanted to ask was about the physical features of the crab. And in order to answer this, I needed to know the taxonomy of the organism itself and how the morphology plays into that. So here I found out that Sila, the mud crab, is actually a decapod, which means it should have 10 legs. They possess smooth carapaces with gastric zone identifiable by an S-shaped depression. Apart from the physical features of the carapace, my research also led me to the different morphological changes the crabs undergo as it goes through one stage of life to the other. Now, to help explain this to the reader, I actually created this graphic that you see on the slide from a mishmash of different illustrations that I saw online. So the edits are mine, although some of the pictures are not. But it is very useful for my RRL because it summarizes several paragraphs in my RRL into one figure. So you may want to invest in the creation of these graphical representations so that your readers have visual aids when they try to read your paper. Now, when I started writing about the methods that I need for the research, I had to first answer the question, is there really a problem in species identification? And as you go through the literature, you will have your ups and downs because you will discover that, hey, there is actually a method. So, for example, in this paragraph that I shown here, one line highlighted in red indicates that each species have differing maximum sizes, so carapace shape and width were frequently used as a means for differentiation. So I'm like, whoop, does this mean that there's no problem? But eventually, as I moved on, look at the line in purple. This method, however, cannot be accurately used when samples are of differing ages and does not account for variation within species that may cause differences in sizes. So although this technique exists, additional literature says that it is not very reliable. But then again, you go through more papers, and this time I saw that color and color patterns on the legs of the crab appeared to be a consistent marker. However, because of climate change and the warming of waters, it can actually affect the color of the carapace, and thus it's no longer as consistent as it was before. So, through my exhaustive search of the literature, I finally found my answer, which is yes, there are existing morphological markers for species identification, but there's still a problem because they are not very consistent. So there is still a gap in the knowledge that I can actually fill. So skipping through the last part of my outline, which is asking about the different molecular methods that are useful for the crab, you will notice that in this paragraph, I didn't talk about DNA barcoding in general because that's simply a topic that is too broad for my study. Instead, I focused on how DNA barcoding can actually be used in crabs. So I cited prior studies that have been done that used molecular techniques and the different markers that were used before. This prevents me from being distracted by other methods that were used in other organisms, such as plants, vertebrates, and mammals that may or may not be useful for the organism that I'm studying. And to conclude your paper, you might want to put in a paragraph that summarizes all the findings that you've had and the gap in the knowledge that you noticed. So, for my paper, let me read to you my conclusion. Current morphological methods for species identification in SILA are problematic since they cannot be applied across developmental stages. Color-based techniques are also affected by warming waters since color of the crab carapace is affected by temperature. The need for accurate identification of early developmental stages is also much needed as yields of fish ponds are highly dependent on the production of species that have faster growth rate and larger maximum sizes upon maturity. So as you can see, I've pointed out the need to do the research that I actually want to do. So to close this video, just a few reminders on things to avoid when you're writing your RRL. As much as possible, paraphrase the words that you see in the paper. Some students actually become lazy and use quotation marks whenever they're trying to cite a reference, but what you need to do is to try and understand the concepts that are in the RRL and write them in the words that are most comfortable for you. I'm talking about comfort. Try to avoid excessive use of words that are not needed, such as moreover, however, etc., etc. Try to use as few words as possible because in this day and age, people only have time to read what is essential. So, thank you for watching this video. Happy writing and happy hunting for those important references. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Also, if you want to share your experiences in writing an RRL, please let me, your resident Filipino scientist, know in the comments section below. So that's all for today. See you around!